Captain Rodriguez stared at the scanner readings for the third time, hoping they would somehow make sense. After 25 years of patrolling the outer edges of Zephyrian space, he thought he had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. Smugglers trying to sneak past customs, pirates with jury-rigged weapons, even the occasional ancient derelict ship floating dead in space. But this was something entirely different. "Run the scan again, Techo," he ordered his communications officer. A young Zephyrian with bright purple skin and 4 arms that moved across the console with practiced ease. Techo's secondary, eyes blinked nervously as he worked. "Sir, I've run it 6 times already. The results are the same. The ship is definitely there, but according to our database, it shouldn't exist." Rodriguez leaned back in his command chair, the familiar hum of his patrol ship's engines doing nothing to calm his growing unease. The Zephyrian Empire had been exploring space for over 10,000 years. Their databases contained information about every known species, every technology, every possible combination of metals and energy sources that could be used to build spacecraft. Yet the vessel floating 3,000 kilometers off their starboard bow didn't match anything in their records. What about the material composition? Rodriguez asked, hoping for some clue that would make this mystery ship less mysterious. Lieutenant VOR, the ship's science officer, turned from his station with a confused expression. "That's the strangest part, Captain. The hull appears to be made from some kind of metal we've never encountered before. It's incredibly dense, but our scans show it should be lighter than aluminum. The energy readings are even more bizarre. Whatever powers that ship is putting out more energy than our main reactor, but we can't detect any fuel source." Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. In all his years of service, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming at him that something was very, very wrong. Ships didn't just appear in the middle of nowhere with impossible technology and unknown materials. There were rules to how things worked in space, laws of physics that even the most advanced civilizations had to follow. "Sir?" Techo's voice cracked slightly. "I'm picking up movement from the vessel. It appears to be ... waking up." The bridge fell silent except for the soft beeping of various instruments. Rodriguez watched his main screen as the mysterious ship slowly began to rotate. What had appeared to be a simple, if unusual, spacecraft now revealed itself to be something far more complex. As it turned, sections of the hull began to separate and rearrange themselves, transforming the vessel's shape entirely. "By the 7 moons," whispered Lieutenant VOR, "it's rebuilding itself." The ship that had looked sleek and streamlined moments before now bristled with what could only be weapons. But they weren't like any weapons Rodriguez had ever seen. Instead of the usual plasma cannons or particle beams that most civilizations used, these looked almost organic, as if they had grown rather than been built. "Captain," Techo's voice was barely above a whisper. "They're trying to communicate." Rodriguez straightened in his chair. Finally, something familiar. First contact protocols were drilled into every Imperial officer from their first day of training. There were proper procedures, established methods for dealing with unknown species. He could handle this. "Put them through, but keep our shields at maximum power." The main screen flickered, and instead of the usual visual communication that most advanced species preferred, only audio came through. The voice that emerged from the speakers was calm, confident, and spoke in a language that their translation system struggled to process. "This is Captain Chun of the Earth vessel Defiance. We come in peace, but we're prepared for war." Rodriguez felt his heart skip a beat. Earth? He had never heard of any planet by that name, and he was sure it wasn't in their galactic database. But something about the way the human had spoken those words sent ice through his veins. There was no fear in that voice, no uncertainty about being vastly outnumbered in unknown space. Just a simple statement of fact. "Unknown vessel," Rodriguez replied, following standard protocol. "You are in Zephyrian Imperial space. Please identify your species and state your intentions." There was a pause, and Rodriguez could swear he heard someone laughing in the background before the human captain responded. "Species designation is human. As for intentions, we're explorers. We've been away from this part of the galaxy for quite some time and wanted to see how things were going. Though I have to say, your welcoming committee is a bit smaller than we expected. Rodriguez looked around his bridge at his crew of 35 aboard what was considered one of the Empire's most advanced patrol vessels. Smaller than expected? The human ship appeared to be roughly the same size as his own. What kind of welcome had they been expecting? I need to report this contact to Imperial Command, Rodriguez said, stalling for time while he tried to figure out what he was dealing with. Standard procedure for first contact with unknown species. Of course, came the reply, and Rodriguez could hear the amusement in the human's voice. Take your time. We're not going anywhere. Though I should probably mention you might want to update your stellar cartography. Some of the star positions in this region seem to have changed since we were last here. Lieutenant VR looked up from his science station with wide eyes. Captain, that's impossible. Stars don't just change position. It would take millions of years for any noticeable stellar drift, and even then. I know what's impossible, Lieutenant. Rodriguez snapped, his nerves getting the better of him. He opened a private channel to Imperial Command, knowing that this conversation was about to become someone else's problem, while he waited for his connection to go through. Rodriguez found himself staring at the human ship. Now that it had finished its transformation, he could see details that made even less sense than before. The hull seemed to shimmer and flow like liquid metal, and occasionally he caught glimpses of what looked like forests or gardens through transparent sections. What kind of species built gardens into their warships? Imperial Command, this is Patrol Captain Rodriguez aboard the Vigilant Star. I have a priority 1 first contact situation at coordinates 7-7-Alpha-9. Unknown species claiming to be from a planet called Earth. They have technology that doesn't match our databases and are making claims about stellar cartography that seem impossible. The response came back quickly, and Rodriguez could hear the skepticism in Commander Zelix's voice. Captain, run a full diagnostic on your sensors? Earth was a planet mentioned in some very old Imperial records, but that civilization went extinct thousands of years ago. You're probably looking at pirates using false identification. Rodriguez looked at the human ship again, watching a small craft that looked more like living creatures than machines. Occasionally emerged from bays and circled the main vessel before disappearing back inside. Sir, with respect, I don't think these are pirates. I'm sending you the sensor data now? I've never seen technology like this, and the energy readings are off the charts. I recommend we contact the Archives Division immediately. There was a long pause before Commander Zelix responded, and when he did, his voice had lost all traces of skepticism. Captain Rodriguez, maintain your position but do not, under any circumstances, take any action that could be considered hostile. I'm dispatching the research vessel Cosmic Dawn to your location with a full archaeological team. If these really are humans, then we're dealing with something far more significant than a simple first contact situation. As Rodriguez closed the channel, he noticed that more human ships were beginning to appear on his sensors. Not approaching, just materializing out of what had seemed like empty space. In the span of 10 minutes, he had gone from investigating one mysterious vessel to being surrounded by 12 of them, each one different from the others. Each one impossible, according to everything he knew about space travel. The human captain's voice came through the speakers again, still calm and friendly. Captain Rodriguez, we couldn't help but notice you've called for backup. That's perfectly understandable. New meetings can be nervous times for everyone involved. We've taken the liberty of calling a few friends of our own, just to keep things balanced. We hope you don't mind. Rodriguez looked at his sensor display and realized that what he had thought were 12 ships were actually just the ones close enough to detect. The computer was now showing energy signatures scattered throughout the entire star system, and the numbers kept climbing. The emergency council meeting had been called at 3 in the morning, Imperial Standard Time. High Admiral Corax had never seen the council chambers filled with such an unusual mix of people. Military commanders sat next to ancient historians, while xenobiologists whispered nervously to archaeological experts. Everyone looked tired and confused, except for Dr. Velnus, the Empire's chief archivist, who looked absolutely terrified. "Gentlemen, ladies, honored counselors," High Admiral Corax began, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. 6 hours ago, Patrol Captain Rodriguez made contact with vessels claiming to represent a species called humans. Initial reports suggested this was a minor first contact situation. We now know that assumption was dangerously wrong. He activated the main holographic display, showing the sensor data from Rodriguez's encounter. The assembled council members leaned forward as they watched. The impossible readings scroll past. Energy signatures that defied known physics, ships that could reshape themselves at will, and technology that seemed to bend the very laws of space and time. "Dr. Velnus," the High Admiral continued, "you've had several hours to search our historical databases. What have you found?" Dr. Velnus, an elderly Zephyrian whose scales had turned white with age, stood slowly. His forearms shook slightly as he activated his personal datapad. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "What I found, High Admiral, should have stayed buried in the deepest vaults of our archives. The name human appears in our oldest records, dating back over 3,000 years. But these aren't just historical footnotes. These are warnings written by our ancestors, warnings that we apparently forgot." The chamber fell silent. 3,000 years was ancient history, even by Imperial standards. Most species in the galaxy hadn't even achieved spaceflight that long ago, Dr. Velnus continued, his voice growing stronger as he read from documents that hadn't been accessed in centuries. "The first entry I found was in the personal journal of Fleet Commander Zethmal, who lived during the second expansion period. He wrote, 'Encountered the humans today. They have no empire, no vast fleets, no conquered worlds. Yet every species in this sector speaks of them in whispers. When I asked why, an old Krelian trader told me, because they don't conquer worlds, Admiral. They remake them." Several council members shifted uncomfortable in their seats. The Krelians had been extinct for over 2 millennia. Their entire species had been wiped out by a plague that consumed their homeworld. If humans had been around when the Krelians were still alive, that meant they were far older than anyone had imagined. "There's more," Dr. Velnus said, his voice growing quieter. "Much more. And it gets worse." He brought up another document, this one bearing the official seal of the Third Emperor. "This is from the Imperial Science Division, written during the height of our expansion. They were tasked with studying human technology after capturing one of their vessels. Listen to this report. The captured human ship defies all known principles of engineering. Its hull appears to be grown rather than built, and it repairs itself automatically when damaged. More disturbing, the ship's computer system seems to be alive. It responds to questions, shows emotions, and has refused to provide any technical information about its construction. We recommend immediate destruction of the vessel before it can somehow escape containment." "Did they destroy it?" asked General Farn, the Empire's current head of military research. Dr. Velnus looked up from his datapad with haunted eyes. "The research facility was found empty 3 days later. The ship was gone, along with all the research data and every scientist who had been working on the project. Security footage showed them simply walking out of the building and boarding the human vessel, which then disappeared. None of them were ever seen again." The council chamber erupted in worried murmurs. Ships that could think for themselves, technology that could convince scientists to abandon their own species. This wasn't just advanced technology, this was something else entirely. "High Admiral," called out Counselor Rax, an elderly female, whose family had served in the Imperial government for generations. "Surely these are just old stories exaggerated over time. No species could possess such abilities." Dr. Velnus activated another file, and the holographic display filled with military reports. "I thought the same thing, Counselor, until I found the battle reports from the Outer Rim conflicts." "Are you familiar with the destruction of the Malthar Empire?" Everyone in the chamber knew that story. The Malthar had been a powerful military force that controlled nearly 100 star systems. One day, their entire civilization had simply vanished. No distress calls, no signs of battle, no survivors. It had been one of the great mysteries of galactic history. According to these classified reports, Dr. Wellness continued, the Mouther made the mistake of attacking a human colony ship. Just one ship, carrying families and children to a new world. The Mouther fleet numbered over 500 warships. They demanded the humans surrender and become slaves. He paused, looking around the chamber at the faces of the most powerful beings in the Empire. The humans sent back a single message: you have one chance to leave. Take it. When the Mouther refused and opened fire, the human colony ship did something that our ancestors still couldn't explain. It didn't fight back. It didn't run. Instead, it somehow reached out across space and touched every Mouther world simultaneously. Within 6 hours, the entire Mouther Empire had been relocated. Relocated? General Tharn asked, confusion clear in his voice. Every Mouther citizen, every building, every trace of their civilization was carefully moved to a distant galaxy far beyond our borders. The humans left behind detailed reports explaining exactly what they had done and why. They said they didn't believe in destroying entire civilizations, but actions had consequences. The Mouther would be allowed to live, just somewhere else where they couldn't hurt innocent people. The chamber was completely silent now. The idea of moving entire civilizations across galactic distances was beyond comprehension. The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of most stars. There's one final document, Dr. Wellness said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's a message left by the last human ambassador to have official contact with the Empire. It was sealed in the deepest archives with instructions that it should only be opened if humans ever returned to Imperial space. He activated the final file, and a 3-dimensional image appeared above the council table. It showed a human woman, middle-aged with kind eyes and a gentle smile. When she spoke, her voice carried a warmth that somehow made her words even more terrifying. To whoever is watching this, the holographic human began, my name is Ambassador Torres, and I'm recording this message in the year 2847 Imperial Calendar. By the time you see this, my people will have been gone from your part of the galaxy for at least 1,000 years. We left because we realized our presence was making other species uncomfortable. When you can reshape matter at the molecular level, build worlds from nothing, and travel between stars as easily as walking across a room, people tend to get nervous around you. She paused, and her expression grew more serious. But if you're watching this, it means we've come back. And if we've come back, it's because something in the galaxy needs our attention. We want you to know that we haven't changed. We still believe in peace and cooperation in helping others grow and prosper. But we also want you to understand something important. The ambassador leaned forward, and her gentle smile took on an edge that made every being in the council chamber feel very small. We've had 1,000 years to grow, to learn, to build. 1,000 years to perfect technologies that were already beyond your understanding. If we seem different now, if our ships look impossible and our abilities seem magical, remember that we warned you this day would come. We left detailed instructions on how to contact us peacefully, how to work with us as partners rather than trying to control or threaten us. She stood up, and her final words rang through the chamber with quiet authority. We sincerely hope you've learned wisdom in our absence. Because if you haven't, if you've somehow convinced yourselves that you can treat returning humans the way your ancestors treated other species during your expansion, then you're about to discover just how much we've grown during our time away. Choose carefully. The hologram faded, leaving the council chamber in complete silence. Finally, High Admiral Corax found his voice. Dr. Wellness, in your professional opinion, how should we proceed? The old archivist looked around the chamber at the most powerful beings in the Empire, then gave the only answer that made sense. Very, very carefully. Ambassador Lyrian had handled first contact situations with over 40 different species during her distinguished career. She knew the playbook by heart, arrive with an impressive escort, demonstrate the Empire's technological superiority, offer protection and trade agreements, and guide the new species into becoming productive members of imperial society. It was a formula that had worked perfectly for centuries. Standing in the airlock of her flagship, the Diplomatic Crescent, she felt confident despite the troubling reports from the archives. Yes, humans had apparently been powerful once, but that was 3,000 years ago. Civilizations rose and fell. Technologies were lost and forgotten. These modern humans might have impressive ships, but they were clearly just explorers who had wandered into imperial space. She would handle them the same way she had handled every other species. "Ambassador," her aide, Lieutenant Vex, whispered, as they prepared to board the human vessel. "The escort fleet is in position. 12 heavy cruisers, just as you requested." Lyrian nodded approvingly. The escort fleet was purely for show, of course. Imperial policy forbade aggressive action during diplomatic meetings. But new species needed to understand the Empire's power, and nothing said galactic civilization. Quite like a formation of warships. The docking tube extended from the Crescent to the human ship, which had identified itself as the Defiance. As the airlock cycled open, Lyrian expected to see the usual sterile corridors and mechanical surroundings that most spacefaring species preferred. Instead, she stepped into what looked like a garden. The walls were covered with living plants that seemed to pulse with soft light. The floor beneath her feet felt organic, almost warm, as she could swear she heard the sound of running water somewhere in the distance. The air smelled like flowers and rain, nothing like the recycled atmosphere of a normal spacecraft. "Welcome aboard the Defiance, Ambassador Lyrian." The voice came from a human who approached through what appeared to be a grove of small trees. Captain Chun looked exactly like the humans in the old archives, bipedal, relatively small, with that unsettling directness in her eyes that the ancient reports had mentioned. She wore no uniform, just simple clothes that seemed to shift color slightly as she moved. "Captain Chun," Lyrian replied, activating her translation implant and falling back on diplomatic protocol. "I bring greetings from His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Kurthan, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire. We welcome you to our space and hope to establish productive relations between our peoples." Captain Chin smiled, and Lyrian noticed that several other humans had joined them, seemingly appearing from the walls themselves. They all had that same unsettling confidence, as if they knew something she didn't. "That's very kind of you, Ambassador. We appreciate the warm reception. Though I have to say your welcoming committee is quite impressive. 12 heavy cruisers for a single diplomatic meeting? We're honored." Lyrian felt a moment of surprise. The escort fleet was positioned well outside sensor range of most species. How had the humans detected them so easily? "Standard diplomatic protocol," she replied smoothly. "Now, shall we discuss the terms of your integration into Imperial society? We have several programs designed to help newly contacted species adapt to galactic civilization." She gestured to Lieutenant Vex, who began projecting holographic displays, showing various Imperial worlds, trade routes, and development programs. It was an impressive presentation that had convinced dozens of species to join the Empire voluntarily. Captain Chun watched the display with polite interest, occasionally nodding or asking questions about specific details. Her crew gathered around, and Lyrian noticed they seemed to be having entire conversations without speaking, their eyes occasionally flashing with brief points of light. "This is all very interesting," Captain Chun said when the presentation concluded. "You've built quite an impressive civilization. The trade networks alone must require incredible coordination. How do you manage the logistics of moving goods between so many different worlds?" Lyrian smiled, pleased that the human was showing proper appreciation for Imperial achievements. "We use a combination of hyperspace freight networks and automated distribution systems. It took us centuries to perfect, but we can now move cargo from one end of the Empire to the other in just a few weeks." "Fascinating," Captain Chun replied. "We use a different approach." She gestured toward one of the walls, which suddenly became transparent, revealing what lay beyond. Lyrian gasped as she saw dozens of massive containers floating in space near the Defiance, each one larger than her entire diplomatic ship. We were carrying some supplies for a colony world when we met your patrol ships, Captain Chun explained. Casually, would you like to see how we handle interstellar logistics? Before Lyrian could respond, the containers began to simply disappear. Not moving away, not entering hyperspace, just ceasing to exist in one location and appearing somewhere else entirely. Where did they go? Lieutenant Vex whispered, his voice shaking slightly. Oh, just home to Earth for processing, Captain Chun replied as if she was discussing the weather. They'll be sorted, packaged, and sent to their destination colonies. The whole process takes about 6 minutes. Lyrian stared at the empty space where the containers had been. Instant transportation across interstellar distances? That was impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed the output of most stars. How? She asked, her diplomatic composure starting to crack. Captain Chun exchanged glances with her crew, and Lyrian caught that flash of light in their eyes again. It was almost as if they were consulting with someone or something far away. Well, Captain Chun said thoughtfully, it's a bit like folding space. Except instead of folding it, we just convince it that things are already where they need to be. Space is surprisingly agreeable once you learn how to ask nicely. The casual way she described technology that defied everything Lyrian knew about physics sent chills down the ambassador's spine. But she pressed on with her mission, falling back on the authority of the Empire. Captain Chun, I think there may be some misunderstanding about your situation. You see, this region of space falls under Imperial jurisdiction. While we certainly welcome new species, there are certain protocols that must be followed. Territorial agreements, technological assessments, cultural integration programs. Captain Chin held up a hand, and Lyrian fell silent. There was something in the human's expression that reminded her uncomfortably of the warnings in the ancient archives. Ambassador, I appreciate your offer, but I think you may be the one who's misunderstood something. We're not asking for permission to be here. We're not seeking integration into your empire. We're simply letting you know that we've returned to this part of the galaxy. She gestured again, and the wall display showed a star map that made Lyrian's blood freeze. Hundreds of star systems were marked with soft blue indicators, spread throughout what the Empire considered its territory. These are human colonies, settlements, and research stations that have been established over the past few months, Captain Chun explained. We've been very careful not to interfere with any existing civilizations, of course. We're not conquerors. But we needed places to set up infrastructure for our return to galactic society. That's impossible, Lyrian whispered. We would have detected colony ships, construction activity, resource extraction, ... Would you? Captain Chun asked gently. Your sensors are designed to detect the kind of technology your empire uses. Ships that burn fuel, construction that requires mining, colonies that need to import supplies. We don't work that way anymore. She touched a control panel that seemed to grow from the wall at her gesture. Suddenly, the Defiance's hull became completely transparent, giving them a perfect view of the space around them. Lyrian could see her escort fleet in the distance, but she could also see something else, ships, dozens of them, surrounding the entire diplomatic meeting. But these weren't like any ships she had ever seen. They moved like living creatures, flowing through space with impossible grace. Some appeared to be made of crystallized light, others looked like they were grown from some kind of metallic coral. A few seemed to be constructed from what appeared to be controlled black holes, warping space around them in beautiful, terrifying patterns. We didn't bring those ships to threaten you, Captain Chun said, noticing Lyrian's expression. They're just curious. It's been a long time since we've had visitors, and everyone wanted to get a look at how the Empire has grown. Everyone? Lyrian managed to ask. Oh, yes. Earth's population is somewhere around 40 billion now, and most of us can travel pretty much anywhere we want, whenever we want. Word spreads quickly when something interesting happens. 40 billion people who could travel anywhere instantly. The implications hit Lyrian like a physical blow. The entire population of the Zephyrian Empire was only about 12 billion, spread across hundreds of worlds. Now, Captain Chun continued, about your offer of protection and client species status. It's very generous, but we'll have to decline. You see, we've learned a few things during our time away from galactic politics. We've discovered that the best way to avoid conflicts is to make sure everyone understands exactly what they're dealing with. Admiral Kresh had commanded fleets in 7 major galactic conflicts and had never lost a single engagement. His tactical genius was legendary throughout the Empire, and his flagship, the Stellar Dominance, was considered the most powerful warship ever built by Zephyrian technology. As he stood on his bridge watching the Third Imperial Armada move into formation around him, he felt the familiar confidence that came with overwhelming superiority: 200 ships, the largest military force the Empire had assembled in over 50 years. Each vessel was a masterpiece of Imperial engineering, armed with weapons that could crack planets and shielded by energy barriers that had never been breached in combat. Against them stood a single human vessel, the same ship that had apparently embarrassed Ambassador Lyrian during her diplomatic mission. Admiral, his tactical officer, Commander Trix, reported from her station. All vessels are in position. The human ship is maintaining its previous location and shows no signs of defensive preparation. Kresh nodded, studying the tactical display. The Defiance hung in space like a piece of abstract art, its hull shifting and flowing in patterns that made no sense from an engineering perspective. Intelligence reports claimed it could reshape itself, but Kresh had dismissed such claims as exaggeration. Ships were ships. They had hulls, engines, weapons, and shields. Everything else was just storytelling. "Open a channel to the human vessel," he ordered. "Let's finish this quickly." The main screen activated, showing the same human captain who had disrupted the diplomatic meeting. Captain Chen appeared to be standing in what looked like a garden, completely relaxed, despite facing the largest battle fleet in Imperial history. "Captain Chen," Admiral Kresh began, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power, "you are surrounded by the Third Imperial Armada. You will surrender your vessel immediately and submit to Imperial authority, or you will be destroyed. You have 60 seconds to comply." Captain Chen looked thoughtful for a moment, then glanced at something off-screen. "Admiral, before you do, anything you might regret? I should probably mention that you're not actually surrounding us. You're surrounding what you think is us. There's a difference." Kresh frowned. "What kind of response was that?" "Captain, I can see your ship on my sensors. You are outnumbered 200 to 1. There is no possible way you can resist this fleet." "Well," Captain Chen replied with that same unsettling smile that had been described in all the reports, "you're right about being outnumbered. But you might want to double-check your count." Before Kresh could ask what she meant, his tactical officer's voice cut through the bridge like a blade. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the fleet formation. Something's not right." Kresh spun toward the tactical display and felt his confidence evaporate. The single dot that had represented the human ship was multiplying. Not approaching ships joining the formation, but the same ship somehow becoming many ships. Within seconds, the display showed dozens of identical vessels scattered throughout. "His fleet. Impossible," he whispered. "Run a full sensor sweep? Check for cloaking devices, hidden ships, anything?" "Sir," Commander Trix replied, her voice shaking, "the sensors confirm it. There are now 47 identical vessels matching the energy signature of the original ship. They're not cloaked ships decloaking. They're the same ship, somehow existing in multiple locations simultaneously." Admiral Kresh had seen a lot of impossible things during his military career, but this defied everything he thought he knew about reality. Ships couldn't just multiply themselves. Matter couldn't exist in multiple places at once. There had to be an explanation. "Admiral Kresh?" Captain Chen's voice came through the speakers, and now it was coming from multiple sources as each copy of her ship broadcast simultaneously. "I tried to warn you. We're not actually a warship. The Defiance is what you might call a mobile research station. We're scientists, engineers, and explorers. But since you seem determined to test our defensive capabilities, we'll have to show you what happens when." Academics get irritated. The human ships began to move, and Kresh realized he was watching something that violated every law of physics he knew. The vessels didn't accelerate gradually like normal spacecraft. They simply decided where they wanted to be and appeared there instantly. One moment a ship would be on his left flank, the next it would be directly above his flagship, having somehow moved through the space in between without actually traveling through it. "All ships, open fire," Kresh commanded, falling back on the one thing that had never failed him. When facing the impossible, apply overwhelming force, the Third Imperial. Armada erupted in a display of devastating firepower. Plasma beams, particle cannons, and quantum torpedoes filled the space around the human vessels with enough energy to sterilize entire star systems. For a moment, the brightness was so intense that the bridge's viewing screens had to dim to prevent eye damage. When the light faded, every human ship was exactly where it had been before, completely undamaged. "Impressive light show," Captain Chun commented, her voice still perfectly calm. "We especially like the quantum torpedoes. Very creative use of contained antimatter. But you might want to check your targeting systems." Commander Trix was frantically working at her station, her forearms moving across controls with desperate speed. "Admiral," she reported, her voice barely controlled, "none of our weapons found their targets. According to the sensor logs, every shot we fired hit empty space." "That's impossible. The ships were right there." "Yes, sir, they were. But apparently they were also somewhere else at the same time. Our targeting computers couldn't lock onto something that was simultaneously in multiple locations." Admiral Kresh stared at the tactical display, watching as the human ships continued their impossible dance through his formation. They moved like living things, flowing around his vessels with casual grace, occasionally pausing to examine a particular Imperial ship before moving on to the next. "Admiral," Captain Chen's voice continued, "we're going to demonstrate something. Now, please don't be alarmed. We have no intention of destroying your ships or harming your crews. But you seem to be having trouble understanding what you're dealing with, so we're going to have to be more direct." Before Kresh could respond, every screen on his bridge suddenly displayed detailed schematics of his own ship. Not just the basic layout, but engineering specifications that were classified at the highest levels of Imperial security. Power distribution networks, weapon control systems, life support configurations, even the personal quarters assignments. For his senior staff, "How did you access our systems?" he demanded. "Our networks are isolated and encrypted with quantum-level security." "Admiral," Captain Chun replied gently, "you're thinking about this the wrong way. We didn't break into your systems. We simply asked them to share their information with us. Most machines are quite cooperative once you learn how to communicate with them properly." As if to demonstrate her point, Admiral Kresh watched in horror. As his own tactical display began rearranging itself, new information appeared, showing him things about his fleet that he had never known. Hidden structural weaknesses in ship hulls, inefficiencies in power distribution, even suggestions for improving crew morale based on psychological profiles of his officers. "Stop this!" he shouted. "You're violating every law of war, every principle of military engagement." "Actually," Captain Chun replied, "we're following those laws quite carefully. We haven't fired a single shot, haven't damaged any of your ships, and haven't harmed any of your crew members. What we're doing is simply sharing information. For instance, did you know that the power coupling in your third engine bay is showing signs of stress fracture? You might want to have that looked at." Commander Trix looked up from her station with wide eyes. "Sir, she's right. Engineering has been requesting permission to inspect that coupling for weeks, but it wasn't scheduled for maintenance until next month." Admiral Kresh realized that he was no longer fighting a battle. He was being given a lecture by someone who had casually dismantled every assumption he had about warfare, technology, and reality itself. The humans weren't trying to defeat his fleet. They were showing him, with terrifying gentleness, exactly how defenseless he truly was. "What do you want?" he asked, the fight going out of his voice. "What we've always wanted, Admiral, to be left alone to do our research and exploration in peace. But since your empire seems determined to treat our return as some kind of military threat, we felt we should clarify a few things. Every human ship suddenly moved to surround Admiral Kresh's flagship, not in an attack formation, but in what looked almost like a protective circle. The message was clear. They could have destroyed his entire fleet at any moment, but had chosen not to. The Defiance isn't a warship, Admiral. It's a mobile university. The people aboard aren't soldiers, they're professors and graduate students. We were in this region studying some interesting gravitational anomalies when we encountered your patrol ships. What you've been fighting is essentially a research vessel that got mildly annoyed at being interrupted. Captain Chun paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that made every person on Kresh's bridge feel very small. Emperor Kurthon had ruled the Zephyrian Empire for over 30 years, and in all that time he had never felt truly powerless. Even during the worst crises, he had always known that his vast fleets, his advanced technology, and his empire's accumulated wisdom could overcome any challenge. Today, sitting in his private study overlooking the imperial capital, he felt like a child who had just discovered that the universe was far larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The reports were spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle that refused to make sense. Admiral Kresh's tactical analysis of the encounter with the human research vessel, Dr. Velness's historical findings about humanity's past presence in the galaxy, Ambassador Lyrian's diplomatic report, which read more like a confession of complete failure than a standard first contact summary, but it was the final document that truly terrified him. A simple message that had appeared simultaneously on every communication device in the Empire, from the most secure military channels to civilian entertainment networks. The message was brief, polite, and absolutely impossible to ignore. To the leadership and citizens of the Zephyrian Empire, humanity has returned to galactic society and wishes to establish peaceful relations with all civilized species. A formal diplomatic representative will arrive at your capital world in 3 days to discuss the future of our respective civilizations. We look forward to productive conversations. 3 days. Not a request for permission to visit, not a negotiation about terms and conditions. Simply a polite announcement that someone was coming, whether the Empire wanted them or not. A soft chime from his personal communicator interrupted the Emperor's brooding. His chief of staff, General Vorth, appeared on the holographic display with the kind of expression that usually preceded very bad news. Your Majesty, General Vorth began, we have a situation developing in the outer territories. 7 of our vassal species have declared independence in the past 12 hours. They're all claiming human protection and requesting immediate recognition of their sovereignty. Emperor Kurthon closed his eyes and tried to massage away the headache that had been building since this entire crisis began. Which species? The Kellians, the Morocks Collective, the Tridian Federation, and 4 others. Your Majesty, these aren't primitive worlds seeking freedom. Some of these species have been part of the Empire for over 1,000 years. They have integrated economies, shared defense agreements, cultural exchange programs. They can't just declare independence. Apparently they can, the Emperor replied wearily. What's our response? General Vorth hesitated, and that hesitation told the Emperor everything he needed to know. Sir, under normal circumstances, we would deploy the 4th Fleet to remind these species of their obligations to the Empire. But given the current situation with the humans... You're afraid, the Emperor finished. Yes, sir, I am. We all are. If these species really do have human protection, and if the humans are even half as powerful as the reports suggest, then any military action we take could trigger a conflict we cannot win. Before the Emperor could respond, another chime sounded, this one from the palace's external security system. General Vorth looked off-screen for a moment, then turned back with barely controlled panic in his eyes. Your Majesty, there's a ship approaching the palace. It wasn't detected by our sensors until it was already in the atmosphere. Security forces are scrambling to respond, but... But what, General? Sir, the ship is landing in the palace gardens. It's not attacking, it's not making any threatening moves, it's just Dotting, as if it has every right to be there. Emperor Kurthon stood up, his decision made. If the humans wanted to talk, then talk they would. Running and hiding would only delay the inevitable and might actually make things worse. Stand down all military forces, he ordered. Have the palace guard escort our visitor to the formal reception chamber, and General, make sure everyone understands that this is a diplomatic meeting, not a military encounter. Anyone who treats it otherwise will answer to me personally. 30 minutes later, Emperor Kurthon found himself face to face with humanity's official representative. Dr. Wright looked nothing like what the Emperor had expected from the species that had just casually dismantled thousands of years of imperial authority. He was middle-aged, slightly overweight, and wore simple clothes that looked like they had been chosen for comfort rather than diplomacy. He carried a worn leather bag that seemed completely out of place in the grandeur of the imperial reception chamber. Your Majesty, Dr. Wright said with a slight bow, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I'm Professor James Wright, formerly of Cambridge University on Earth, currently serving as humanity's diplomatic representative for this region of the galaxy. Dr. Wright, the Emperor replied, gesturing to the chairs that had been arranged. In the center of the chamber, I must admit, you're not what I expected. Dr. Wright smiled as he settled into his chair. I imagine not. Most species expect their first human diplomat to be some kind of military commander or political leader. But we found that academics tend to be better at these kinds of conversations. We're used to dealing with complex problems that don't have simple solutions. And what kind of problem do you think we have, Dr. Wright? The human professor opened his leather bag and pulled out what appeared to be a simple notebook and pen. Well, Your Majesty, it seems like there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's place in galactic society. Your people seem to think we're some kind of returning conquerors, intent on destroying or subjugating the civilizations that have grown up in our absence. He flipped through several pages of handwritten notes. The truth is quite different. We left this region of space 3,000 years ago because we realized our presence was making other species uncomfortable. When you can manipulate matter at the quantum level and travel between dimensions as easily as walking across a room, people tend to get nervous around you. Emperor Kurthon leaned forward. Then why return now? Why come back after so long? Dr. Wright's expression grew more serious. Because, Your Majesty, we've been watching. And we've seen some concerning trends in how galactic civilization has developed. Species being forced into client relationships, technological development being controlled by a single dominant power, entire civilizations being prevented from reaching their full potential. He closed his notebook and looked directly at the Emperor. We came back because we believe every species deserves the chance to grow, to explore, to become whatever they're capable of becoming. Your empire, for all its achievements, has been limiting that growth for centuries. And you think you can do better? The Emperor asked, unable to keep the challenge out of his voice. We think we can help create something better, yes. Not human dominance, not another empire, but a genuine partnership between equals, the species that declared independence today. They're not seeking our protection because they're afraid of you. They're seeking it because they want the freedom to explore possibilities that imperial law has forbidden for generations. Dr. Wright stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the imperial capital. Your Majesty, I want to show you something, with your permission? The Emperor nodded, and Dr. Wright pulled a small device from his pocket. The window's view suddenly expanded, showing not just the capital city but the entire planet, then the solar system, then the galaxy itself. This is what the galaxy looks like to human sensors, Dr. Wright explained. Every point of light represents not just a star system, but the civilizations that live there, their potential for growth, their dreams and aspirations. The display zoomed in on specific systems, showing species the Emperor had never heard of, technologies that made imperial achievements look primitive, art and music and literature that had been developing for millennia in isolation. All of this exists, Your Majesty. All of this beauty and creativity and potential. But it's been hidden, suppressed, controlled by the need to maintain imperial stability. We're not here to destroy what you've built. We're here to help it grow into something magnificent. Emperor Korthon stared at the display, seeing his galaxy as if for the first time. What are you proposing? Dr. Wright turned back to face him, and the Emperor saw not conquest in his eyes, but genuine hope. Partnership, Your Majesty. The Empire has incredible administrative experience, diplomatic expertise, and cultural knowledge that we need. Humanity has technologies and capabilities that could benefit everyone. Instead of one species ruling over others, imagine what we could accomplish working together. And if I refuse? Dr. Wright smiled sadly. Then you refuse, and we respect that decision. We won't force cooperation any more than we'll tolerate oppression. But the galaxy is changing, Your Majesty. Species that have been client states for centuries are remembering what independence feels like. Technologies that were considered impossible are becoming commonplace. You can be part of that change, help guide it into something beneficial for everyone, or you can watch it happen without. He packed his notebook back into his leather bag and stood to leave. The choice, as always, is yours.